the Howard Bailey or the Howard B. Star Company, in 1960, the Earth just didn't erupt, and there was, the Howard B. Star Company. Something came before that, and what came before that was Howard's ancestor, or his father, was involved in the business, and Howard's father, his name was William F. Stark, and his mother's name was Maria, and they were from, I always mispronounce this, Pomerania,
Yeah.
up near the Baltic, right near Poland,
Yeah.
northern Germany. And he was born, William Stark, Howard's father, was born in 1860. He was the youngest of three brothers. Their family immigrated to Milwaukee, directly to Milwaukee in the early 60s, and in 1872, which wasn't uncommon, there was a smallpox epidemic, and the parents died, leaving the three boys. So basically from when he was 12 years old, he was pretty much fatherless, William Stark. This is a picture of him when he's 18 in Milwaukee, and this clip, it says that it's an Auckland amateur baseball team in 1878, and they were supposedly one of the better teams in Milwaukee at that time. So what happened was that it'd be kind of like Turners or something like that. They had groups. Baseball was so popular, it was unbelievable. In the later 1800s, William was a sugar broker in Milwaukee, and he stumbled upon this company, the American Candy Company. And the American Candy Company is in the Third Ward on Broadway, and that building still exists. Yeah, it's a bunch of lofts right now. It's renovated. But it was a big time candy company. Like one, I wish I had my little pointer thing. One floor would be like jujus and jelly beans. Another floor would be licorice. Another floor would be chocolate. Another floor would be, whatever it may be. But it was a full-line house. And this was at the time where, like, the lozenge department was kind of the heart of this factory. And the lozenge machine was invented, like, in the 1840s in the Boston area. And, you're talking, like, maybe 50 years, these guys really could advance it at the time. The Industrial Revolution with candy was like crazy, and it was like penny candy at the time. And it was going quick. It was sugar processing. People were just going friggin' bullshit with candy. And what would happen is that, these guys in the area would come by with wooden wagons, with horses, with buckets, like wooden buckets, and they'd come in there and they'd just fill them up with jelly beans and take them around town. So it was kind of interesting. And what happened, this is supposedly the story, and I don't see why it wasn't so. Young William's capacity at the time, he was a bookkeeper, and as he was putting in his entries in the ledger, the boss man came by and he's like, "William, those curlicues, those are snorkels, what are you doing with those?" And supposedly snorkel, I looked it up, I couldn't find a German translation, it was Danish, but snorkel means snorkel. It means snorkel. Snorkel means snorkel, like a curlicue. And supposedly William, a little bit later, when he developed the snorkel bar, named it such. And that sign still exists, it's on the American Candy Company building, facing south. So have you guys ever seen that down in the Third Ward at all?
No.
It still exists. So, but it's getting really faded. I took that about 2 weeks ago. And so anyways, another side note is that young William was he was astute enough so that by 1917, when they went public, he was a partner with Louis Keene, the guy that started the candy company. And supposedly, at that time, those two guys had the highest income in the state of Wisconsin, which is pretty interesting. What's that, John?
So Willie was a successful candy guy.
Yeah, very successful. Now, Howard, when he was a young guy, this is Howard as a naval cadet, which interrupted his University of Wisconsin days. He was a pilot in the Navy, but before that, he would work. He told me riding on his bicycle around Milwaukee when he was in his early teens and in his teens. selling candy. He said he didn't have samples most of the time, helping his father. And he was very athletic. He liked to go in marathons in the Milwaukee River. He said that there used to be I remember seeing these little trophies over at their house where he would get first and second, but they were 2 mile, 5 mile races, in the rivers. And he would go downtown, and he and buddies would jump off the bridges. And he went to West Division High School, and then he went to Madison, and he was on the varsity water polo team, and he also was all Big Ten in 1920 as a football player. He was a good athlete, and he told me that water polo made football look like tiddlywinks. He said water polo is a lot, because if you've ever seen water polo at all, I mean, they do all that stuff, that kicking and stuff underneath, so Howard gets out of UW-Madison, works for his dad and Louis Keene, and primarily in sales capacity. He becomes vice president of sales. And American, like a lot of businesses during the 30s, came across pretty hard times. My father, Bill, told me that the management, he always heard, it was because of the unions. That was the management at the time was saying, they were the ones that, shut us down. But my father said, hey, it was insolvency. That's basically what happened. So what happened then, Howard, was, about 40 or a little older, 41. What he did was he took about 20 of the best employees from this building, the American Candy Company, pushed them over to this building right over here, which is 181 North Broadway, much smaller affair. But hey, kept it going. He probably stole, probably most of the equipment. And because one of the guys, there were two guys that really helped him make the place fly. One was a mechanic that was working at American named Elios, Al Hagee. He was a great guy. And he worked till he was 1990. He helped me when I had my little thing. And he went with Howard. He was very instrumental, very mechanical. And he was very mechanical. He was very cunning. He was very entrepreneurial, very optimistic, always optimistic. Oh, and that's one thing I always remember about that guy was he's positive. And Howard had a good, I think you would say the same thing too. He was very focused, and he was entrepreneurial, and he created loyalty with the people that were around us. But those two guys were very instrumental. And what happened was Al, went into the Navy in World War II. And when he got discharged, he started working for Necco. And Necco, at the time, it was E.J. Brock and Necco were the big guys.
Where was that at?
That was it's not Cambridge. I think Cambridge was a factory, I think, in the 20s on. That was, or later on, but someplace in Boston area.
Uh-huh.
And they were very strong in lozenge. And so was Brock, and so was Stark, but Stark was a lot smaller. Now, E.J. Brock in Chicago and Stark, their processing with these old lozenge machines, it was a batch process. They would, the finished product, after it got processed, they put it on trays or boards, and then they would wheel it into a hot room to dry out, and then the next day they would package it. Well, Necco had a continuous process. They had all these tunnels. So what Al was doing was he was, I don't know if he worked at night and drew in his boarding house during the day, or worked during the day and drew these plans at night, but he was sending Howard all these different plans and stuff. So he was very effective, he was very helpful. And what Howard actually had Riney do after the military was go down to E.J. Brock and pretty much do the same thing to these guys. And so that helped a lot. So anyways, here's just a picture of some lozenge. Lozenge was really it's a kind of candy that I would not really, want to buy a lot of. People, I think, throw those things around more than they eat them, but it's basically 95% sucrose or table sugar, 2% starch, water, and some flavor, and just to bind it. Made into a consistency like a dough. they make it in big Sigma bladed dough mixers, then they put it in smaller containers, put it up on a plateau where a fellow like this would take a palette knife, and then he would put it like, through here there's like an opening where there's an extruding worm of like about 6 worms, extruding the stuff out through calendar rollers, which would size it down to whatever thickness the piece would be. Whether the hearts would be one thickness and the candy wafers would be thinner and the mints would be thicker or whatever. Then if it was hearts, it would go underneath the printer. And that's a Necco printer, which is the inferior printer to a Stark printer. Al was instrumental in inventing the 4-sided continuous ink printer for Stark, which really created really good print and really fast registration on these things. Nobody had it until Stark sold to Necco in the 90s or whatever. These guys were always doing things like this machine. The heart of that machine might have been 1860. What they would do is they would drill like holes into it and try to get them lighter. And like I think even in the 80s they were putting servo drives on them. This guy, Riney, when he was like 90 years old, he finally finished inventing a rotary cutter for it, and he sold it to Necco because he said, I'm going to sell it to your competitor. I mean, he was so into it. So I mean, they were always trying to improve the process. After the candy was cut underneath these cookie cutters, the web would go back and get recirculated and go back into the extruding head once again to get processed. The finished product would go up and then go through a tunnel to get dried, at least in Necco's case, and then they would get packaged by packaging girls. They'd come down and get segregated, and they'd put it in like little trays, and it would be tucked with cellophane, with cellophane wrappers. And this item was like a cash cow for Stark. I mean, this is what made Bill, he could go to Europe or, go to the bar or whatever he wanted to do. This is the 359. Hearts are really nicely printed. That's a packet with a little window in it. These are about, what is that, 1 3/8 ounce. Depending on what the price point through the years would be, go up to maybe 2 ounces and, fluctuate. You want to be around, 10, 25 cents as, inflation goes on or whatever. In a silver box, that was a cash cow. Cash cow, the business, yeah, the sweethearts. This is one of the reasons probably why Bill sold the company, is because candy cigarettes. See, like even those sweethearts were very profitable. One turn annually. More turns, more earns. This is regular comp good. So I mean, this is what you want. It's something every week these guys are buying it. This was sort of the backbone. Bill was always like sweaty palmed about that being outlawed, and it would change. It might change the scenario a little bit. My father, Howard was kind of like almost like a caveman in his. I mean, my father, as he'd be the first one to admit, I don't really care for business, and I mean, he would choke a little bit. And so, I mean, I think that might have had we had the best cigarettes around.
And why would you develop the cigarettes?
What's that?
Howie?
I think they were around with American. I think he helped. I mean, these were so realistic, they were so good. But they were always like, at least in the 70s, from what I remember, like there was always people trying to outlaw them every couple of years. There'd be, and Bill the sugar lobbies were so strong, they'd slam it. But I mean, he'd have to go to Washington and, work it. The candy wafer, we had, everybody talks about a Necco wafer, but I've seen things on the internet, I don't know where, I gotta pull them back somehow. But the Stark wafer, or the American candy coming wafer, around the turn of the century existed. That was an okay item, but it wasn't anything that, was, set the world on fire. The reason I have this thing in Puerto Rico, okay, circa 1950 or so, Ronnie Duco he's getting antsy. He wants, Bill's gonna come into the company. He wants to do something. Any kind of advantage he can take, he'll take it. what he does is he has a business, a laundromat business on the side, accrues enough money, and goes to Howard, or maybe Howard goes to him. I don't know which one it is, but they make an agreement. Okay, we're gonna get a operation down in Pouncey, Puerto Rico. 50-50. So Randy he'd start it up, and then anything that he made, like Stark would sell, and that was like Operation Bootstrap. It was like like an incentive, because in Puerto Rico they're trying to get the agrarian society into a manufacturing one. It was like Nevada, no taxes. They would have no taxes in Puerto Rico. A lot of good advantages. That was a good one. Also, the sugar was less expensive. The labor was less expensive, but better. And there were so many containers coming down that a lot of empty containers were going up. It was cheaper to ship from Puerto Rico, like a container of candy money or wafers, from Puerto Rico to Pouncey, Puerto Rico to New York, than it was at the same time to ship from Milwaukee to Chicago.
Wow.
So I mean, it really was a good situation for 10 or 15 years that they had it. Okay, so then he goes down there. Rennie goes down there, starts up that little factory, and then Bill he's like, he just graduated or he's going to college, and he goes on this, and this was the highlight of his life. So he went around the world in like a 4-masted bark, no refrigeration, no motor, no engine. It was like it wasn't even insured, because if it sank, they didn't want to do it. The guy that owned it was like was a Finn. They had like about 10 of these things or whatever, and it was just like boned. They had like 30 guys doing it, and he was like in the last commercial voyage around Cape Horn that ever existed. What they did was, he was like 19 years old. He had, or 20 or something. He had a junior year abroad. He heard about this ship. He said, "I want to do that, man. I want to get on that ship." So he dropped out of school and went to Australia, and helped them load with grain on the ship, and he got on and whatever. But went around. He went from like Australia to London or England, and then after that, they sold it. The owner of the shipping line sold it to Germans who turned it into a naval cadet ship, put an engine in it, and it sank with like 80 cadets in the South Atlantic. They all drowned in the 50s. So anyway, so Bill comes on board. That's a little narcissistic there, Bill, and he joins the company. Now there's another family up in Duluth, Minnesota. They call the Walls, okay? And the Walls, that's a candy factory up in Duluth, and it still exists. They were doing this like turn of the century to like about 1935 or so. Arch, sales guy, just wired. And what he and my dad used to do was they'd go they'd be like in southern Indiana with like, at the end of the day, this would be like in the 50s or something, and they'd have all these samples. So they'd go to like a grade school like Stone Bank or something down there, and they would, like in the afternoon, the kids would they would always time it like during when they were playing, like the recess, and they'd start throwing candy in, and the teachers were like, what are you doing? And the kids they couldn't stop them. The kids were like going crazy. But so the Walls got involved with and then his son, like Hans became the head of sales. John Wall became the head of sales, and then his son, Bill Wall, was the head of sales. A great guy.
Of Stark.
Of Stark. I talk to Bill like probably once a month or so. Okay, so this is 1960, and like Howard loved the snorkel. He'd always push that thing wherever he could. There's a little billboard out there, and I'll tell you, one of the motivating factors of them moving out here was like growing up. Bill always looked up to Philip Brumder a lot as a kid. I think he might have crewed for him, sailing, and he always thought he was like a pretty cool guy. Philip Brumder, that's Lisa's dad and Nancy's dad. Philip Brumder's family was involved with what is that, Dick? What's the company?
Applied Power.
Applied Power, thanks. And so they were like, I think the first ones that moved, they had Dynex, which was right off of Capitol,
Dynex were bad.
Yeah, and my father thought, well, look, you know, Philip Rumber and his family's doing that, and it looks like it's going well. You know, he just pushed hard on Howard. Let's move out to Pewaukee. You know, a lot of, you know, you could take, they were like in that 3-story building, all cut up and everything. Could take the lines. Ted Eschweiler did, you know, good friend of my grandfather's, you know, did the design, you know, cheap as possible probably. And, you know, they put their lozenge lines there, and you know, it was 1 story, all, you know, trying to do it the most efficient manner possible. They had a railroad siding so they could get, you know, bigger amounts of raw material in and finished goods out. I think they were even shipping it sometimes. And then the labor was good, and probably the biggest thing is, you know, it was 10 minutes away from their house, you know, versus, you know, 45 minutes or whatever. But okay, so then what happens? Okay, Riney's down in Puerto Rico, and Riney's in Puerto Rico, and there's another guy named Carl Eyman who works. He eventually became vice president of operations for Stark. Very smart guy. Went to MIT. I think he's a mechanical engineer. I don't think he was the EE guy, but he's just, you know, a very decent person. He worked for a company called Lewis Candy Company out of Malden, Mass. And what he did was he did the same thing for Lewis as Riney did with Stark, but down in Cuba, okay? So he had a candy plant in Cuba, and it was lozenges. And so what happened? So what happened was that you know, Batista, you know, things started getting hot, you know, mid-50s or whatever it was, you know. And Riney, I don't think he had to do much coaxing, but Riney was a wheeler dealer. Riney got Carl to come work with him, and somehow we got the equipment too, and I think it was ongoing.
So they shipped the equipment from Cuba to Puerto Rico?
They had the plant in Cuba.
Okay.
And Riney started, and Carl, I don't know how the actual, you know, procedure was, but I know we had a candy line in Cuba when this overthrow came. So then what, and I don't know if it was, I think it was actually churning out stuff. I think that Carl might have just jumped off the raft just in time. We got the equipment, it was running, they grabbed it. And so Bill, you know, this is the kind of stuff Bill loves, you know. I mean, Bill likes to be in the, you know, the limelight wherever he could. So Bill goes down to Cuba to, you know, this plant. And he told me that when he was down there, it was just like, you know, he's negotiating, he wants that equipment, you know, he wants that line, he wants to get the line out of there, take it to Puerto Rico or wherever. And he said it was just like dark except like one light bulb, kind of like just, and a bunch of kids with Tommy guns, you know, like, you know, he said there were like 15-year-old kids running around. He said that guy was in the background. He said he was, you know, that he saw him in the back. I don't know if that, but I don't know, but it could very well be. But what eventually happened was Bill Stark leaves, and Cuba's got a national lozenge line. And I know that they make, I've seen their lozenges in Canada, you know, like about 15 years ago. I was talking about where they made, you're saying they're made in Cuba. I go, I know where they made those things. I know where they make them, you know? So I think their line's still going.
Wow.
Okay, this is a mogul machine. Now this machine, okay, when Stark came out, their department was actually lozenge, and I mean, I'm telling you, during the 60s and 70s, we kicked ass in lozenge. We made more hearts than anybody in the world. We had 4 lines in Pewaukee. We had a plant out in San Leandro in the Bay Area doing 3 lines. We had another plant in Riney and Carl moved their plants to Thibodaux, Louisiana. We had 3 lines in southern Louisiana in the bayou. So we had a lot. We were kicking out more hearts than anybody. And so lozenge was one of our departments in Pewaukee. Caramel was another department, and then this department, which was creams. And what you can make in the heart of the cream department is a mogul machine. In a mogul machine, anything you can warm up and liquefy and put through those hoppers, there's like little teats on the bottom that squirt candy into these molds, these starch molds. Then they take the molds and they'll put them into a room to dry overnight so they solidify get into the right state, and then they get pushed back into that machine, and then there's these grippers that flip it, and it goes down, the candy goes through, the starch goes through a screen and gets recirculated and gets filled up into a tray where it gets stamped again with the empty molds to get squirted on. And the candy, it doesn't show it on this picture, but it'll go through a screen, on top of a screen, and then go to like a, like an like a brusher or an air machine to, clean the candy and gets packaged. But you wouldn't believe the things you can make on this machine. You can make candy corn, you can make like creams, Guma beers, York peppermint patties, all like marshmallow eggs, fudge eggs. One thing about candy, it's very regional. A lot of the products are like these cinnamon teddy bears. We put them in a bag, and kept them fresh. And they were really good sellers in like Minnesota, the Dakotas, to the Northwest. Nice creams. And they had chocolate and they had licorice.
Yeah.
And those, I think they probably still make them. I went on eBay to look up licorice babies, and there's guys selling, there's packets of licorice babies. Guys selling a packet, the packaging of it.
I always said they sold those by the millions.
Yeah, they probably were pretty popular. I'll tell you, those licorice babies, Anna's, and through the history of candy, since day one, probably when somebody was in a cave with a pot and a fire, what all these guys do is like the end of the week, they take their candy, all the stuff that's laying around,
Make it black.
Douse it with anise. They were pretty popular in the Midwest. But what had happened was that and he stuck a lot of money into it. And they also made like snurkelettes, like the little guys, And like for the air parade, my father got all pumped up. He had the guy make like green mints and then throw it out on, off the hay bales of, a wagon, and then, have lunch and have fun at the Aaron Inn or whatever. But what it really got was kind of that sold well were slapsticks. And slapsticks, like Howard was also proud about putting 100%, milk caramel in his caramel. Well, okay, Bill Stark and John Wall, they got a bunch of colored nougat, then they doused it with like banana. And they said, let's put it on a stick, and it's like a slapstick. Supposedly it's like, what clowns used to do is slap around. It was like national, like outsold the snorkel like crazy. And it was,
Really?
Yeah, so, and they don't make the snorkel anymore, but I think, well, actually Necco doesn't make anything anymore. But Necco was making the slapstick when they took it to Boston. But, and then my mother at ULS, like in the 60s, she would take caramel and she'd make caramel apples for the ULS rummage sale. I remember all for about 2 or 3 days just making caramel apples. And then, she made it, I don't know if she made it off of snorkels. She probably made it off of snorkels without any nougat on it, I'm sure. But then it inspired, my mother was pretty good at like, hey, why don't you do this, Bill? And, so then they made caramel apple dip, like 2-pound caramel apple dip, and they'd sell it to roadside stands, and then produce, like grocery produce, really did a lot of volume, It's interesting how, I think any item that comes out, it's never like some off of a focus group. I think it's always like a janitor going, hey, like, why don't you do that, man? It zings, So then this, or just some of the plants. I'm not going to go through all of them. We had one in Paducah that made candy canes that like a couple brokers were involved with us that, and then Gilliam, then Woodstock, in the 80s they bought Charles Miller, which makes these little Mary Jane peanut butter pieces that were popular. And we
Remember those?
Yeah, those are pretty good. They were like doing like, I think, $2.5 million, small company, but they make, they have a good margin. You can make the guy that owned the company, he was going to Shaniqua, all the time hanging out. But we bought the company, and it went from like 2.5 to like almost 4. I mean, because our brokerage network was pretty good. And then, like I said, they moved these plants over to here. He went to Kroger and he'd go to Walgreens, and I mean, he did a lot of volume. He made the thing grow, but he wasn't like an inside guy at all. And this guy, Ronnie, was almost like a son to Howard. And so what he did was, Ronnie and my father said, Howard might have been even dead at the time. I think it was from about 82 or something like that. So he said, okay, look, I'll trade you. You can have Thibodeau. Give me York. So he takes York. So he goes off on his own. He has nothing to do with Stark anymore. And so he goes to York, and he does okay, but it's not, it's like maybe 1/5 the size, 1/6 the size of Stark or whatever. But he's pretty good. He's a wheeler dealer, and then he sells it to a guy, and he helps the guy. I forget his name. He changed it to Classic Caramel Company. It still might exist, but that's what that star is for. And then this is like,
There's Bill.
There's Bill. That's Bill, and this is Bill Wall. This is that little guy's son, who was at that time was Hans and John's. And this is Don Lemire. He's like the broker in Minnesota and the Dakotas. I think Bill's probably giving him money because he's won the prize of selling more teddy bears than
And that's your mom?
No, I think that might be Don Lemire's wife, And so then like it came. I worked there from about 81 until after he sold it, until about 90. He got pretty good money. He sold it to West Ray Finance because that way they if you're sold to somebody in the industry, it would be like that's a cut that's a Rose machine that's worth $15,000.
Yeah, asset.
and so you could put the sizzle on and all that, I didn't end up with like a lot of coin in my pocket, So, but maybe it was a good thing that he sold it. Maybe it was a good thing, because there's a lot of medium-sized companies and smaller companies in that industry that really they consolidated. I mean, Mars and Cadbury and Hershey. I mean, they literally have. I think if you look at on the computer, they probably have 98% of the market. And all the rest is just like you have like Tootsie Roll. You have like Spangler. You have like Jelly Belly. You have a couple of companies that they might do 50 to 150 million or something, or maybe a couple $100 million in sales that are solid, that are really, but for the most part, it's really cutthroat. And it's a thing where, if in the seasons, you get these big, like Walmart type stores, there's nothing wrong with the conversation hearts. They just didn't, the sell-through wasn't 100%, so you eat, whatever. I mean, it's a lot of big retailers can really make it difficult for you. So whatever, And
He sold it.
so he sold it, yeah. And so now it's Goff's welding. They make welding curtains in there. And I don't know if you guys ever go by there. I sometimes drive by for, like shortcut.
Yeah.
You ever go by there?
Yeah, all the time.
When I go by there, what I think, I go, man, I'll tell you, the only thing that's constant in American business is change.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's about it,